Welcome to True Crime and Other Worldly Stories. I'm your host, Jay-Z. From unsolved murders to supernatural encounters, buckle up your seatbelt. We're on a journey through the shadows. At around 9 p.m. on March 3rd, 2022, a 31-year-old woman named Corey Richens tucked her three young sons into their beds and then headed downstairs to her kitchen inside of her luxurious home in suburban Utah. Once she got down to the kitchen, she yelled out for her husband, whose name was Eric, to come join her in the kitchen. Corey had some big news that she had just learned that day, and now that their kids were all asleep, they were going to have a drink. She was going to celebrate this great news and share a drink together. A moment later, Eric walked into the kitchen, and Corey grinned at him and handed him his drink, and then gestured for them to go upstairs to the bedroom. And so the two of them went upstairs, they sat down on the bed, and then Corey broke the big news. Corey's tiny real estate company had just found out that day that they were very likely going to close on a deal for this gorgeous 20,000 square foot mansion in Utah for $2 million. Now, Corey knew that when she bought this property, she could do a couple of renovations to it and then quickly sell it for $3 million, meaning she was about to make a $1 million profit on this property. Corey had been working really hard on a real estate business for years, but this really represented a first big break. She and Eric lived in a very conservative part of Utah, where it was kind of expected that someone like Corey would stay at home with the kids and be a good housewife, and that would be her life. But Corey didn't really want that. She wanted to have a professional career that was kind of on par with her husband's. Eric ran a very successful masonry company that allowed the family to take vacations to Mexico, Spain, all around the world, and to afford their sprawling property at the end of a cul-de-sac. Corey had stayed home when the three boys were much younger, but now that they were 5, 7, and 9, they had decided to hire a nanny, which had allowed Corey to finally go out and pursue her professional dreams. So totally beaming with pride, Corey sat there on the bed and clanked her husband's glass and went over all the details of this deal and talked about how great their lives were about to become with all this additional income. But fairly quickly, both of them decided they were too tired to stay up and celebrate. So they, especially Eric, he had earlier that day gotten an allergy shot, and it totally just knocked him out. He was tired, weak, just exhausted. So they both decided just to go to bed. So after brushing their teeth and changing, they got into their bed, turned off the light, and they were about to lay down and go to sleep when they heard their 7-year-old crying in his bedroom. Both parents let out a groan. Then Corey, she stood up, indicating she would handle it. They knew often their 7-year-old had nightmares, and the only way he could go back to sleep is if Corey laid with him, and kissed him. Eric rolled over to go to bed. Corey walked out of the bedroom, went down the hall, went into her son's bedroom, got under the covers, and before long, she was fast asleep. A few hours later, Corey suddenly sat up inside of her son's bedroom. It was about 3 a.m., and for a second, she couldn't even figure out where she was. The house was silent, totally dark. She was confused, but then she remembered she had gotten up to take care of her son. And so she checked on her son again. He was still asleep. So she climbed out of the bed. She tucked him back in. She gave him a kiss. And then she left his room and went back down the hall to her bedroom, where she climbed into her bed, and she saw that Eric kicked off all the covers, and he was sleeping on his back. So Corey lay down next to him, and kind of rolled up next to him, pulled up the covers, and then she closed her eyes to go to sleep. But right as she did that, she noticed something very strange. Eric's body was freezing cold. Corey opened her eyes and sat up in the bed. She turned over and kind of pushed Eric to see if he would sit up, figure out why he was so cold. But Eric did not budge. And when she pushed him, he felt really heavy, like dead weight. And so suddenly, starting to panic, Corey yelled Eric's name several times, but Eric didn't budge. And so Corey leapt from the bed, grabbed her phone, and dialed 911. And when the dispatcher picked up, Corey was so frantic that she didn't even know what to say. She couldn't spit out the words. But finally, she got out that she needed help. The ambulance will be there as soon as it can. So a few minutes later, Corey heard the sirens outside, so she ran downstairs, flung the door open, and cried with relief as the paramedics walked in. But when the paramedics got upstairs into the bedroom, they went to go revive Eric. They saw right away it was already too late, gone. First responders had no idea what killed Eric. He seemed like a really healthy guy, just gone for an 8-mile run. He used to go hunting all the time. So the idea that he just suddenly died, it was just very suspicious. Police did find a pill bottle on the bedside, but it was empty and it was very, very old. So they automatically ruled that out. When they asked Corey what she thought might have happened, she was totally in shock. But she did say, I don't know. I have no idea what happened to him. But, the day before, he did get that allergy shot, and he had kind of an adverse reaction to it, and really just wanted to go to bed early, which seemed kind of odd. But Corey and the first responders both agreed seemed pretty far-fetched that an allergy shot would lead to Eric's death. Suicide was also considered a possibility by first responders, but Eric really didn't have any reason to want to harm himself. He was a very devoted, loving father who adored his kids. He coached all their teams, just very involved with his kids. He loved his kids. He'd be out the back kicking the soccer ball with them, and his business was booming. And he had just learned that night his wife's business potentially was going to start booming as well. And so ultimately, the police told Corey, we're just going to have to open an investigation and try to figure out, what happened. We'll be in touch. If you think of anything that might help the investigation, please let us know. Corey said, okay, of course, I'll tell you. But she really wasn't listening. All she was thinking about was her 3 sons who were still sleeping in their beds and had no idea that their father was no longer with them. Over the next few weeks, while the family waited for autopsy results, Corey really focused her energy on her 3 kids, who were really having a hard time with the loss of their dad. Eric had been such a hands-on father that his absence was enormous in these boys' lives. The 5-year-old kept asking, "Where's Dad? And when can I see him again?" The older 2 boys, who did sort of understand that their dad was no longer with them, would also ask questions like, well, can Dad still see us? Or can Dad still hear us? And these questions broke Corey's heart, because she did not have any answers to those questions. And so she tried to find a children's book online and bookstores that dealt with grief in hopes that that would kind of help her kids deal with the grief, But none of the books she found helped at all. And so a few weeks after Eric's death, when still nobody knew anything about how he died or what had killed him, Corey decided that she would take a different approach to helping her sons grieve. Instead of trying to read a book that somebody else wrote about how to deal with grief, Corey just called her sons around and began telling them stories about their dad. And as she told these stories, that she made up, she would start drawing these sketches of angels and kids, and of their dad being in heaven. Very illustrated book, and the kids really took to these stories that she was telling. It was really helping them cope with their father's death. She thought, why don't we turn our stories, all these illustrations, into an actual grief book for kids? That way, other families who children are dealing with loss can read these stories as well and find some comfort. After all, Corey knew firsthand that there really weren't any good grief books on the market. And so she knew, for those who needed it, this would be huge. On April 13th, so 6 weeks after Erica died, and several weeks after Corey and her kids had begun officially writing this kid's grief book, Corey was backing out of her driveway when from the other end of the cul-de-sac, she saw a police car. And it was the lead detective on Eric's case, Detective Woody. Woody got out of his car, he walked up to Corey, and with a grave look on his face, he told her that he had some big news for her, and it was going to be pretty upsetting. But he knew he had to tell her in person, and right away. He told her that the autopsy results were in, and they determined that Eric had not died of natural causes. He had actually died from a fentanyl overdose. Fentanyl is a very powerful opiate that's often mixed with heroin, and just a little bit of fentanyl can kill somebody. And Eric, it would turn out, had 5 times the lethal dose of fentanyl in his system. Corey was totally shocked at this news and told the detective that Eric didn't do drugs. The only drug he did was periodically he would eat a marijuana gummy before he would go to bed. But that was it. So this really didn't make any sense. The detective was respectful, kind of nodded his head, said, "I totally understand that, but these are the results, and we need to find out where he got fentanyl from. So we're going to need to search all the electronic devices in your house to see if we can find communication between your husband and whoever got him the fentanyl." Corey told the detective that of course they could do that. But as she began to think about all their devices, she suddenly remembered that Eric's business partner, Cody Wright, had actually taken Eric's laptop very shortly after Eric had died. Now, Corey didn't know why Cody had taken the laptop, but Cody had been kind of a thorn in both Corey and Eric's side for several years now. Eric and Cody had been very close friends when they had started their masonry business about 10 years prior. But they had a serious falling out a few years ago. The two men had been on this elk hunt, and at one point Eric had illegally shot and killed a bull elk, and Cody had actually reported Eric after this hunting trip to the game warden. And as a result, Eric got in a lot of trouble and was temporarily banned from hunting anywhere in Utah. The two men still managed to continue their business, and build it, but their friendship had been fractured. They weren't as close as they used to be, and it was like that until Eric's death. Corey didn't get into all the details with the tension with Cody, but she did tell detective, if you want access to the laptop, you've got to talk to Cody. You ought to just talk to him in general, because maybe he has more to do with what happened to Eric than this whole fentanyl thing than he's letting on. The detective told Corey that he appreciated the information, and he appreciated the help and being able to look through all their devices, and that he would go talk to Cody and see if he could retrieve the laptop and find out what was on there. But after this conversation with Corey, the investigation into Eric's death kind of stalled out. When police did follow up with Cody, they didn't find anything on the laptop that was worth pursuing. And outside of talking to Cody, no new information came in about Eric's death or about how he got fentanyl. So the case was just really stagnant, for months. And so while the family kind of just waited for more information to come out about, what happened to Eric, Corey just focused their energy on taking care of her 3 boys and writing this grief book for them. Finally, on March 5th, 2023, so almost exactly 1 year after Eric died, and still police have no idea what happened to him, the grief book was finally done, and Corey self-published it on Amazon under the title Are You With Me? Right away, the book was a total hit with parents of grieving children, and as the 5-star reviews poured in, so too did requests from local media for Corey to be interviewed to talk about this book and why she wrote it and how her kids are doing. Corey had no idea that her book would be this successful, and so at first she was really terrified to do any of these interviews, but eventually she came around and did some of these interviews with local media, and she knew that Eric would be very, very proud of her for doing this. However, what Corey didn't know was there was going to be a very, very, very unintended consequence of publishing this book. Ever since Eric was found dead in 2022, the police in Utah began painstakingly searching all of the electronic devices, and eventually several people who kept seeing all this news about Eric's unsolved murder or unsolved death reached out to police and said, you know what? He did not overdose on fentanyl. He was murdered, and I'm almost positive I know who did it. Lo and behold, the alleged killer that all these people brought up to the police was none other than Corey Richens. On May 8th, 2023, not long after getting all these tips about this alleged killer, the police in Utah felt like they finally had enough evidence to go after this person, and they headed out to make an arrest. While we don't know for sure what happened, because again, this story is still ongoing. It's not even gone to trial yet. Here's what prosecutors say what really happened to Eric Richens on March 3rd, 2022, the night he died. That night, Eric was upstairs when he heard Corey down in the kitchen calling for him, saying for him to come down and join her. So he went downstairs, went to the kitchen, and immediately he saw his wife grinning ear to ear, and she promptly handed him a drink and said, I have big news, and we're going to celebrate. And after the two of them went to their bedroom, Corey told Eric all about this big real estate deal and how their company was about to blow up, make $1 million on it. And after that, they clinked their glasses together, said cheers, and took a sip of the drink. The drink that Corey made for both of them was called a Moscow Mule. It's made with ginger beer, vodka, and lime. But when Corey mixed Eric's drink, put another ingredient in it, a lethal dose of fentanyl. It would turn out Corey had been stealing money from Eric's bank account, and he had found out about it. Also found out that Corey had been taking out these massive loans in their family's name, which Eric was livid about. In fact, Eric was so mad that he had been taught a divorce lawyer and making sure after the could not touch his money. But perhaps sensing that a divorce was imminent, and the money faucet would be turned off, Corey simply took out a $2 million policy on him and killed him. And in order to help her sons deal with the loss of their father, who she killed, she wrote a grief book about it and sold it for a profit. Police say Corey had been working for weeks to figure out the right fentanyl dose to give to Eric. On Valentine's Day of that year, Corey had given a sandwich poisoned with fentanyl, and it also had a love note attached to. But it obviously didn't kill Eric. He just broke out in hives. So Corey got a stronger dose of fentanyl, put it in his drink on March 3rd, and this time it worked. The story that first responders was that they had a celebratory drink, they went to bed, see their son, and then when she came back at 3 a.m., Eric was cold to the touch, and she called 911. But in reality, after she poisoned her husband, and he's laying there still on the bed, slowly dying from this fentanyl, she just got up and paced around the house for several hours, Googling things like how to destroy electronic evidence and luxury prisons for criminals. These searches were, of course, the highly unusual and suspicious things that the police saw when they looked through the electronic devices that Corey had given them. But as much as it made them think Corey likely had something to do with it, they just didn't have any evidence to arrest her. However, after Corey published her grief book and went on these big interviews promoting her grief book, Eric's family, who's watching this happen on TV, couldn't believe it. They were just disgusted because they secretly believed that Corey had killed Eric the whole time. They didn't like Corey to begin with, and it just felt like she did this, and now she's profiting on Eric's death. And so family members began reaching out to police in Utah, and they said, "You really need to look into Corey. We think she killed Eric. This whole grief book thing is a joke. She's a killer." Ultimately, it was those calls from Eric's family to the police on May 8th, 2023. Corey, who denies any wrongdoing and says she did not kill her husband, is currently charged with aggravated murder, which could lead to the death penalty if she's convicted in Utah. She's been being held without bail in Utah, and her book, Are You With Me?, is no longer being sold on Amazon. Thanks for watching. I'm Jay-Z, your guide through the darkness. If you hunger more mysteries and otherworldly stories, go ahead and hit that like, subscribe, and let us know your thoughts in the comments below.